Welcome back, recruits, for the first real content video on this channel. Where first, as you might already hear now, I heard your feedback and I got a decent microphone. At least I hope it's a decent one, and probably the sound quality on this one is going to be a lot better than on the last one. You saw the title of this video. We're going to talk about where I come from, the country of Germany, and the history of grappling around here. This story has been told and retold a couple of times, but for this one I'm going to leave my nostalgia goggles behind and give an honest assessment of the history and the state of Germany that I can oversee from where I am. Actually, I'm from what is pretty much the hometown of grappling in Germany. I'm from Cologne. And this is kind of where a lot of it started. And different to a lot of other countries, it didn't start with jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but rather with the dirty little sibling with a slightly different upbringing called Luta Livre. Luta Livre has always been no gi. There's no gi in Luta Livre, which is kind of historically why it has been the poor man's version of jiu-jitsu back in Brazil, where you wouldn't have to buy an expensive gi. And if you want to get deeper into this, there are now videos on this topic up on YouTube. But you might have seen this old footage of Renzo Gracie fighting a guy in MMA in the cage, and the lights turning out and everything going to chaos, and people trying to kick Renzo through the cage and him kind of knocking someone off the cage. That was him fighting a Luta Livre guy, and kind of the absolute high point of this old school Brazilian rivalry. Well, this estranged brother of jiu-jitsu has been the first ever, and kind of still is probably the predominant grappling style in Germany. This is why I'm sometimes talking about jiu-jitsu, sometimes talking about grappling, kind of to account for the fact that there's not only jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu as the only grappling style around here. The problem with Luta Livre is it has always been the smaller brother. So there's always been less people in Luta Livre because it's basically not been as marketed as jiu-jitsu. And that also accounts for less, let's call it computing power. There are less people with their minds involved in Luta Livre than there are in jiu-jitsu. This is, I think, why jiu-jitsu has brought along more content and has been a bit more evolved throughout history, which led to the, I think, pretty reasonable conclusion that probably all no-gi jiu-jitsu, all no-gi grappling is the same anyways, and it doesn't really make sense other than some kind of historical nostalgia to insist on calling your no-gi grappling Luta Livre or calling it jiu-jitsu for that matter. It's just all the same anyways. And to be perfectly honest, of all those teams that still exist in Germany that insist on them doing Luta Livre and not jiu-jitsu and that being something distinct, there's only one team I can think of that doesn't suck. That's Typhoon Luta Livre. Maybe they do more jiu-jitsu than they're willing to say. They insist on it still being Luta Livre, and they are actually doing a pretty good job and putting people in also international competition. But other than that, the evidence kind of shows that insisting on you doing specifically Luta Livre is probably not a good guarantee for producing high quality grappling. We're right in the meat of the whole thing. German grappling, since its inception, hasn't been particularly good. We kind of had our own little bubble. We hardly made it over the borders to neighboring countries to compete there for a lot of the early times of grappling. So we basically just competed amongst each other and didn't really realize that we were not international competition level. This all changed within the last 4 to 5 years. Jiu-jitsu has ever since then been highly globalized, more than ever before. It's now more globalized than ever. It's never been easier to get content from the best in the world, to see the best in the world compete. There's never been more material on free to play on YouTube. There's never been more instructionals than there is today. This whole development started probably like 4 to 5 years back. I think the early EBI tournaments had a huge role in that. And specifically for Germany, I remember that around 3 years back, there was the first ever seminars by a guy called Oliver Taza, who might be a well-known name to some of you guys. He's a member of what's called the Danaher Death Squad, and he was the kicking off point for a lot of teams in Germany because he did seminars teaching stuff that would partly reappear a bit later in the Enter the System DVDs. And he would kind of plant the seed for people who attended those early seminars to go out and catapult German grappling into, I would like to say the future, but it's rather catapult it into present day. I remember I've been to one of those very first seminars, and he taught snippets of what would later be far wider spread as the back attacks that John Danaher put out. So he kind of taught early aspects of the straitjacket system. To put it in clear words, the fact that German grappling today, at least in some pockets, is up to date, kind of dates back to the seeds planted by Oliver Taza. Ever since then, as it always is, when things evolve, the old guard kind of has to face up to that fact. And basically, those guys from the golden times, from the old times, they had 3 choices. You could either get back into learning and developing and trying to keep up to date, which is pretty hard when you thought you had it all figured out. You could direct the development to the younger generation, to the younger guys you brought up that are more up to date, that are still open to learning. That's what some teams successfully did. Or, that's the way sadly some of them went, you can try to uphold the bubble in which you're still relevant, and outside of it become entirely irrelevant. All those 3 paths were chosen by some of the people of the old guard that are like a generation before me, and partly that brought me up in the sport. Since then, German grappling has, just like grappling in general, has developed more than it ever has before. And weirdly, this whole lockdown situation, I don't know why, but somehow brought back the nostalgia goggles on even some of the guys in my generation, weirdly, and kind of resurfaced people that have been gone from the scene for a while, that are like generation before me, with some weird aspects of it, like even seeing people finally, like 3 years after the first release, seemingly discovering the Danaher Enter the System instructionals and trying to rebrand them as their own system or movement or something, and basically becoming what you get when you order Enter the System on Wish and rebranding it without citing the sources, which is kind of weird because, I mean, if you saw the original, you could just tell that that's what it's supposed to be. But as soon as there's competitions again, whenever this may be, when this whole virus of unspecified origin is gone again, those people will just disappear again, probably, or become irrelevant again, or just uphold their bubbles, which no one really cares for. We're in weird times now, and this kind of muddles the progress we've made. But in general, grappling in Germany, even though we've been late to the party, is on a pretty good way, I would say, today. I mean, we just had the first ever guy from Germany competing in ADCC. Huge credits to his team, Team Matrix Jiu-Jitsu, that have been on the forefront of development ever since their inception. We have guys competing at Polaris. We have people doing decently well in international IBJJF competition. And German grappling is kind of catching up. I would really wish for the entirety to follow in the lead of those some people that are kind of leading the way. But I guess we just have to see what the future brings. And up until then, I still don't have a catchphrase to end this, but I'm the Handsome General, and I'll see you on the next one.